researchers do say that men and women experience sexual arousal very differently, not psychologically, but physiologically. Joining us now with more on that is Dr. Eileen Pallas with the Center for Sexual Health. And last time you were on the program, we were talking about some of the differences in men and women and sex. Today you're talking about the science of sex.
Talking about the science of sex, and I want to start with why do we have sex? And the first answer to that, of course, is very obvious. It's for continuation of the species, right?
Well, it's built into our DNA.
Absolutely. That's the other reason. We call it evolutionary advantage, which means that by taking two different genetic materials, we combine new people, and it helps us to adapt and evolve to fit into our environment and survive.
And not only is it part of our being, there are benefits to having sex.
There are. The other thing I want to mention is oxytocin. The other reason that we have sex is because it increases the oxytocin, which is our bonding, our attraction, our connectedness neurotransmitter, and so that it helps us to, it's released both during orgasm, it's also in men's sperm, so it increases attraction to us when we have sex.
Okay.
And finally, psychologically, there's also reasons. Psychologically, we have, they found actually 13 reasons people have sex in a long-term study, and it had to do with pair bonding, pleasure obviously was the number one, attraction, increasing self-esteem, trying to gain social status.
So we're into the benefits now.
Those, well, no, I'm talking
Okay,
about
well,
just about why we have sex.
Sound like benefits?
Well, they are, but also why we have sex.
All right, let's talk about the benefits.
Okay, there are many actually. The benefits are decreased anxiety and depression, increased self-esteem, increased relationship satisfaction. The amazing ones are increase in immunological system, increased longevity. Believe it or not, the survival rate is longer. You're less likely to have heart attacks and strokes with more sex.
And there are things that affect our brains, our cognitive ability in both men and women.
Yeah, you know, we often see in the TV, we're talking about with Viagra, Cialis, Levitra, and all the physiological treatments we expect from our urologist. But you know what? There are just as many benefits and causes. We use that old joke that, you know, sex is 98% cognitive. Well, it's fairly much true. There's a lot of it, at least 50%, that's in there. And I wanted to talk about two studies that I think are really important.
And first start with men.
Okay. David Barlow did a really amazing study in New York, and he took men who didn't have difficulties and men who did have difficulties, and he threatened them with mild electric shock when they were watching an erotic movie. What he found was the men who didn't have difficulties actually got more aroused by the threat. It kind of excited them and it increased their sexual arousal, whereas the men who had sexual difficulties took it as a threat.
And why does that benefit? Why would you do a study like that?
Because you want to find out what causes sexual difficulties. Okay. What are the differences between the two groups? So the men who were not having difficulties actually took that as well. They tend to look at sexual problems, oh, it's because of something I ate. It's because I didn't get any sleep. Whereas the men who had difficulties and made it internal and attributed it to them failing, something was wrong with them. So they interpreted the shock much more severely. It distracted them from the erotic cues and their arousal shut down. So it tells you how much of that was cognitive, right? Because they were talking to themselves about themselves.
Do you use shock therapy?
Not in therapy.
All right.
But you're going to have pressure from a partner, right? Which isn't that much different than electric shock, right?
All right, let's talk about the study on women.
All right, study on women I did. What we did was we took women who had sexual difficulty, so arousal, desire, orgasm problems, and we compared them to women who didn't have any sexual difficulties, and I did a physiological measure on them while they were watching an erotic film. Now, what these charts do is they will show an increase in arousal. It'll look like an arousal curve. It'll go bump, 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 up with arousal, and if they have no arousal, it's going to be flat or maybe, hopefully not, decrease. What we found was that after I finished this movie, we took them in and I gave false feedback to the women who had sexual difficulty. So I showed them a chart that looked like they had arousal, and in fact, they didn't. So we used deception. When I told them that they had done this huge arousal curve, we put them back in, had them watch the movie again, and you know what? They made it happen. They did it. The second time, they had an arousal curve look just like the fake one and just like the women who didn't have difficulties. So they, without any treatment, without any diagnosis, they got just as aroused as other normal women.
So I'm assuming the bottom line of the study is the psychological is as important, if not more important, than the physical.
That's exactly right, that they did it all by themselves. So when you're thinking about treatment, I want people to be aware that it's not just physiology you're treating here. These women did it all by their lonesome. So you need to be thinking about what's happening in your your head, what's the self-talk in those men? What are you saying to yourself that distracts you from your erotic cues around you? And what also are you saying to yourself about yourself? Are you paying attention to arousal? Are you aware of your environment? Are you being mindful of the
And quickly,
erotic?
we're out of time, but do we have figures on the percentage of people, men and women, who have problems with sex?
With sex, yeah, it's huge. If
Oh,
you're
okay.
going to take all types of sexual dysfunction, it's very huge. In fact, Masters and Johnson said 1 out of every 2 couples experience sexual difficulties at some point during their life. Yeah. So please keep in mind, have more sex. It makes you healthier, stronger, longer life, less heart attacks, less cancer, and do think about both cognitive and physiological components.
That's always why they have those pill commercials during football games and everything else. All right, you can reach Dr. Eileen Pallas by sending her an email to her website, drEileenPallas.com, or visiting her on Napoleon Avenue at her office there.
And we'll have a sex quiz next time.
All right, Leslie.